Welcome to our vlog series on human adaptation. My name is Pippa Bailey and I'm Head of Research Innovation at Ipsos MORI. Over the next few weeks we will deliver a number of vlogs which explore how the coronavirus is impacting our behaviours across all areas of life, business, media, brands and society, and discuss how shifts we are experiencing now may evolve and shape our attitudes and behaviours in the future. We will offer some pithy and provocative food for thought by drawing on analysis from our experts across different industries and areas such as behavioural science, cultural analysis, societal trends, passive monitoring and social intelligence. The COVID-19 pandemic has taken people from a very stable environment to a very fluid environment, such that the behaviours of yesterday no longer really apply. By drawing on our global trends framework, we'll reflect on the sudden avalanche of signals that we've seen accelerating through society globally. And by applying the science of behaviour change, we can better understand which of those new behaviours and habits and routines which have been shaped by the lockdown will become part of the new normal. And we'll also look at culture and how that manifests itself during this crisis and how brands can get ahead of the curve and be part of what that future looks like.
Hi everyone, my name's Billy Ying and I'm Head of Trends at Ipsos MORI. In today's vlog, I'm going to take you through our Ipsos Global Trends framework and talk to you about how doing some signals analysis can help us think about what might be post-COVID-19. Many organisations are coming to us now asking us what's the world going to be like after COVID-19. And I think the first thing that I'd like to say is that most predictions are usually wrong. This chart shows US 10-year Treasury rates and predictions by experts, and as you can see, all of them are wrong. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is while we can postulate about what the future may be, we can't say with any certainty about what the future will hold for us after this is all over. So while we can use approaches such as scenario planning to help us think about what possible futures might be, it would be remiss of us to predict what the future is going to hold. Instead, we can use frameworks and theories such as Ipsos's theory of change, which you can see on this chart, which shows us that macro forces are the longer term impacts that affect the world, move more slowly than trends, which are people's attitudes and values that we're seeing in society, and also signals, which are short-term expressions of change. What we've seen with COVID-19 is a shock to the ecosystem, a tsunami of signals, if you like, which are impacting life now and may result in change in the future. We can use this theory of change and the underlying ideas that go behind it to understand what's happening now and what that might mean for our future world. But with a shock like COVID-19 to our ecosystem, it can make us think that change is going to happen rapidly and change for the good. But what we know from empirical evidence and research, such as the chart that I'm showing you now, is that values hold true in the medium term. If we take this data, which looks at British values between 1999 and 2019, which anecdotally shows the increase in internet penetration in the UK rise from 13% in 1999 to 93% in 2019, we can see how key values across the same time period haven't changed at all, including things like I wish I could slow down the pace of my life, or that I fear technical progress is destroying our lives. So while it can be really tempting to think that what we're seeing right now is going to lead to rapid change, what we can tell by our global trends frameworks and the data points that I just showed you is that the signals that we're seeing, so how people and organisations are reacting to the COVID-19 situation, are that they're becoming more entrenched into the values that they hold. We can show this by mapping some of the signals around COVID-19 that we're seeing today onto our Ipsos Global Trends Values map, as you can see here. So what we're seeing here from this map is that when shocks occur and troubling times are occurring, people are really entrenching back into the values they hold, and this gives them a way to navigate through troubled times. So while values remain relevant, the interesting question that is posed by the COVID-19 crisis is, how do we analyse the signals that we're seeing today to pose questions and uncover tensions for what this might mean for a future world? What we've been doing in this regard is to curate a bunch of signals about what's happening around the world in response to COVID-19, and you can see these on our website here. What I'm now going to do is take 3 of the trends that we talk about in the Ipsos Global Trend Survey, look at the signals that are driving them based on COVID-19, and postulate some tensions for what this might mean for the future of our society and brands. So the first trend I'd like to talk to you about is climate antagonism. So the signals that we see around climate antagonism in relation to COVID-19, you can see on this chart. So the first one is that our global demand for oil has reduced by 29 million barrels a day, leading to, in some markets, eventual negative oil prices. The second signal that we are seeing here is that actually mitigating the disease by staying home and not travelling so much is actually helping to mitigate climate change because there's not as much pollution created. And then the third signal that I'd like to raise is that COVID-19 poses a long-term threat to climate change as the economic fallout may damage investment in greener fuel alternatives. So what do these signals around climate antagonism mean for our future world? Do fewer cars on the street and the fact the air feels and smells cleaner because of a lack of air pollution mean that we're going to make greener choices in the future? Will we ultimately see a behaviour change and a swing towards more greener choices? And will businesses and brands still be able to react to climate change with the same degree of investment than they are in the future? Questions that should be top of our minds. The second trend that I'd like to talk to you about is authenticity is king. This is our brand and retail trend for 2020. The signals that we see in this trend in regards to COVID-19 are as follows. What we've seen is that some brands are responding to COVID-19 and helping aid behaviour change, which is so urgent. So McDonald's in Brazil has redesigned its logo to incorporate elements of social distancing, but then received a lot of backlash from brand experts for changing its valuable assets. The second signal we've seen is that Heinz in the UK opens its first online shop to help feed the nation, selling beans, hoops and soups direct to consumers. And then lastly, Brewdog, which is a beer brand in the UK, has used its distillery and its assets to create punk sanitizer and give it to those in need, but also not forgetting its core customer base by advertising ways of virtually catching up with friends over a beer. So I think the question here posed for brands is, will brands of purpose win through this crisis? Or will it be the big trusted brands that people are tending to go back to for security during these times of strife? And I guess, what is the fine line around brands using their assets in different ways to help guide people through this process? The third and final trend that I'd like to explore from a signals perspective in regards to COVID-19 is data dilemmas. A few signals that we've seen here are a mobile app that tracks people who have been in close contact with those infected was designed and rolled out by the Chinese government. In Europe, more than 200 scientists and technologists are working on a government-backed underlying app technology which national governments can then build their own apps from. But then as a backlash, privacy campaigners are very concerned about this type of technology and are asking governments to really focus on utterly radical transparency when it comes to this sort of technology. So the key questions that we should pose in relation to data dilemmas and what we're seeing in terms of signals in response to this around the disease are whether people are willing to trade their security and their safety with their data sharing with government, or whether there will be a backlash and people are not going to be willing to sort of update these apps on a daily basis and help governments track the progression of this disease. So whatever the future holds, nobody really knows. But what we do know from our work on Ipsos Global Trends is that the underlying values that people hold true to them constitute a really good framework for brands and business to help navigate the road ahead. Thank you so much.
Hello, I'm Colin Strong. I'm the Global Lead for Behavioural Science here at Ipsos. I want to talk about the way in which COVID-19 has presented a fundamental challenge to us, both in terms of brands who need to really understand how behaviour has changed and what might remain in place for the long term, and also policymakers, of course, in terms of managing public health. Now, clearly, some behaviours, particularly for brands, will naturally emerge, and we can see that from the Global Trends Survey. And one of the key issues and questions which we get is, well, what can brands do in order to encourage durability of these behaviours? But also, these behaviours may not emerge naturally. And if that is the case, what can brands do in order to more proactively change behaviour and make change happen? Well, we're in an interesting environment, clearly, and we're calling this a very fluid environment. And what we mean by that is that much of consumer activity traditionally is pretty routinized. It can be a long, slow process to change the habits which we have generated in order to master the environment which we're in. But clearly, at times of significant change, then those routines are disrupted. Those routines, which were so good at mastering one particular environment, are no longer relevant, are no longer valid in this new fluid environment. And so therefore, we're in this very limited window of engagement and opportunity for brands to understand and explore and shape the way in which new behaviours are emerging and are being created. To help us with that, we have our behaviour change framework. And what this framework fundamentally does is to identify the key psychological dimensions and the external dimensions which underpin behaviours. And as you can see on there, we've got motivation. Do I want to do something? And within that, there are a number of sub-dimensions. Ability, am I able to do it? Processing, what are the different ways in which our more automatic mental processes shape the way we understand and act accordingly. Physical environment, to what extent does do the environmental factors influence our behaviour? And another aspect of the environment or external factors is social, and how do social and cultural norms inform the way in which we behave? One of the benefits of this is that it's linked directly through to intervention guidance, so that we can really then make the move from understanding behaviour to then identifying how to change that behaviour. The quote which is thrown around a lot is that for decades nothing happens, and then in weeks decades happen. And this is the situation which we're in right now. It feels as if that brands do have a short window here to create and embed changes to consumer behaviour. And what Global Trends Survey can do is to really identify those behaviour changes and ways that sort of macro forces are bringing about change through the signals that they generate. And then through the use of behaviour change frameworks such as maps, it then feels important to track those consumer attitudes and really use the behaviour change framework to inform the way in which we can then undertake interventions which reinforce or facilitate changes in behaviour that brands are looking for. And that then leads through to testing of interventions before then implementing them in the field. Ways to get started around this. really talk to us. We've got some points of view that can inform the way in which brands can capitalize on those emerging trends. But also it's all about creating new behaviours and how can maps then guide our activity in that area to facilitate that behaviour change. But also one of the other paper is all about, we call it brand rituals in a low touch world. How do you go from embedding these emerging routines through the use of ritual and using cultural cues in order to help do that? It really is an interesting and challenging time for all of us and for brands, but it just feels as if this is an environment in which a lot of change is happening, and it's really important that brands are part of that change conversation.
Hello. One of the big questions that we are all asking at the moment is, what is the new normal going to be? And while it's an interesting question about trying to predict the future, it's also an interesting question because actually it's a cultural question. Anything to do with what's normal is generally an expression of culture. Now, culture is everything that you can think of it encompassing, but it is also a big response to macro forces, and we have a lot of macro forces changing at the moment. We have changes in economics about how our work and how much money we earn. We have changes in politics and how we make decisions about how to look after the health of the nation. There are changes in social expressions, whether we shake hands with people in the UK or give people a kiss on the cheek in Italy. There are changes in the products and brands that we use and the relationship that we might have to plastic in the future. And there are even changes in forms of artistic rebellion. And all of these things at the moment are changing. And we don't know what the end place will be because there are so many different factors at play changing everything. So culture is changing. I think a phrase that encapsulates it very nicely has come out of the environmental movement, and that is, stop saying everything will go back to normal because normal was the problem in the first place. Bit of artistic rebellion in there, bit of political statement, an economic idea. There's lots of things going on in that phrase, so I think it works quite well. And as researchers, this is our time. This is our time to be looking at what's going on in the world and trying to look and map change. So I want to give you a couple of examples that I've seen from some of the work that we're doing in monitoring consumer behaviour as it changes over the crisis. And I want to start with America. Land of the free, where individual rights override collective responsibilities. And here, some of the macro forces are definitely changing culture. So from a social standpoint, lockdown represents quite a big infringement of the rights of the free will and the free will of the American people. From an economic standpoint, businesses will go bust. People in the study that we're conducting, middle class workers, have seen an 80% reduction in their wages overnight. And there is no stimulus package to support them. From a products and brands perspective, I mean, just look at some of the car adverts that have come out of the US, which are all about your car representing your freedom to go anywhere. It's an even stronger message now than ever it was before. Jump across the pond over to the UK, the land of class and social hierarchy and heritage. So how are some of these macro forces going to change culture in the UK? Well, some of the things we've seen already. So from a social standpoint, we have a slightly ambiguous set of lockdown rules, which are actually enforced more through social expectation than law enforcement. From an economic standpoint, the stimulus package that's been introduced in the UK has shown that we have a benevolent government that is there to look after everyone, all of the people. And in terms of the biggest brand winners in the UK, it's going to be the NHS and the BBC. These are heritage brands that are here for everyone. So beyond all that being very interesting and looking at cultural viewpoint on how different countries might change, I think there are three important lessons that we need to take away from this from a cultural standpoint. First of all, Our pre-existing cultural values are an indication of how we are going to respond to the lockdown and to the crisis. If you're trying to get into the business of predicting consumer behaviour and the consumer response, start by looking at the cultural values. Secondly, look for the key symbols in each country that have meaning attached to them. The NHS or the BBC in the UK, the principle of free will in the US. And while those protests, there may be other people against them, there is a fundamental principle that sits at the heart of those processes that has meaning in the US. And thirdly, the new normal will not happen overnight. From a cultural perspective, people are going to be learning about how to change their behaviour and what their response should be. If you are in an industry that is engaging with people, consumers will be looking to you for advice. I think you need to help them on this learning journey, and that is how culture will shift. Thank you.
We are constantly learning and adapting about how we are currently engaging with people, customers, consumers, the public. With heightened emotion and sensitivity, we all need to act with thought and consideration for positive outcomes. Thank you for listening. Please do join us again next time.